So yesterday we learned that when we first decided to become our own nation, that we said, okay, we want to fight together to be to beat the British, but we don't really want to come together and follow each other's rules. We don't want to make any decisions for everybody at the same time. So they decided to form these state constitutions, and those were just plans for their new government. But each state was going to have its own constitution. What that all the constitutions did agree on, though, for every single state was that the power would come from the people. The people would have the opportunity to elect their leaders, and those leaders would then decide the laws and be able to enforce those laws. And so that's what we wrote down. We said that a state constitution is simply a plan for a government, for the state government. Each one had its own. The power came from the people. They did not want a king. They did not want a queen. And that they would be able to elect their leaders. And that was called a republic. Each state created a republic. So with all that being said, let's go to the next page and let's just look at it. So if every state created their own republic, that meant every state had to have their own document. I see here that this is the document for South Carolina. And I see a constitution and lots of fancy words and fancy writing. So each separate state had their own constitution, and that's what it says, and that created a position for the leader of that state. That person was called the president. So each state had their own president, okay? Not governor. We didn't have governors at that time. We just had presidents. 2 years later, leaders rewrote the state's constitution, and the president became the governor. Okay, so again, they changed that wording, and they just said president kind of sounds like it's all over everything, whereas a governor means it's over a small section. So they went in and they changed that. Okay, so if you didn't get down your notes from yesterday, they're there. Please start. We're going to be on the other side today on the right. Well, the first heading says strong state legislatures. So I should be thinking in my mind, what's a legislator? I can't hardly say it, legislature. Each new state constitution called for a powerful legislative branch to make laws and a governor with very little power. The legislative branch would be the main voice of the people. Okay, so let's think about this. These people were able to make laws, and they were even more powerful than the governor. Okay, so they didn't have that much. The governor had very little power. The main voice for the people was the legislative branch. Now, this is what gets me every single time. That voice, that legislative voice, was only from white men who owned property. So it wasn't just for any white man even. It was for the white men that owned property. So the ones that had money, okay? In most states, they were the only people allowed to even vote for representatives. So that meant that about half of the men in each state could not vote. They were too poor. If you were not poor enough to own your own property, you didn't get to vote. If you were a woman, you didn't get to vote. If you were black, you didn't get to vote. If you were a Native American, you didn't get to vote. The only people who got to vote were the men who had land. In addition to the legislator and a governor, each state set up a court system. The job of the courts was to decide the meaning of laws. Okay, we're going to stop right there. We're going to go over to our notes. And we're working around this in counterclockwise. We're going backwards. So 1 was here, 2 is here, 3 is going to be over here. And look, I'm not going to go over to the edge to start writing. I'm going to move it over this way so that you can see. Okay, so the legislative branch, let's write that. Legislative branch. Okay. The legislative branch was also known as, I just put a little squiggly line, and usually when I put a squiggly line, that means that that's what that, another word for that group was. So the legislative branch was also called Congress. We, to this day, still have a Congress that is very powerful. Okay, so Congress. But the part about that was not fair, let's put it equal. It was only, and I'm going to underline only 3 times, white men with property. If they did not own property, they didn't get to vote. So it was their way of controlling it. Let me move this down. And you can pause it if you need to. That was their way of controlling it even more. So yeah, we've gotten away from this king system, but still not great, because the only people that have any power in this world are the rich white men. No one else. So we did have a government called the legislative branch. Now we have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. We have 3 branches, and we're going to learn about all 3 of those. But at this point, this was the only thing we had. We had this Congress, and they had a governor, but he really didn't do anything. He was just kind of there. He was like, oh, you get to go talk for us and speak for us, but you don't really have any power. So Congress is the same thing as the legislative branch, still to this day. And it's only white men with property at this time. Now, it's not that way now. Okay, so while you're finishing that, I'm going to go on down to the bottom. And it says, protecting the rights of the people. And I bet you know where this is going to go. If it went 1, 2, 3, it's going to go back up to 4. One of the main reasons Americans wanted independence, and that's from England, was because they didn't trust the British government to protect their rights. Several states added a Declaration of Rights to their constitutions. These declarations, when I declare it, I just say, this is it. These are my rights. This is what I want. These declarations listed certain rights the government could not take away from the people. These rights included freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Remember, when we came over here, we couldn't even say, that king makes me so mad, off with his head. You know, we couldn't say, I want to go to school and learn something. No, the king told you that. You had no voice. You could not say what you wanted to say for fear that he could kill you. He could have you in prison. And then he also said, you can only be my religion. And that was what the king wanted. He wanted everybody to go to his church. And so when we came over here, we said, we want to guarantee that you can say whatever you wanted to say without being a fear of being harassed, and you can have free religion, whatever you want to do. The declarations also listed things the government could not do. For example, the government could not take a person's property without paying them. Okay, so we could take away the Native Americans' property all day long. But once we took that away from them, you couldn't come in and take it away from us. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, isn't it? We could not put a person in jail without telling them why. Okay, they could still put you in jail. They just had to tell you why before they did it. These declarations became the model for the Bill of Rights that was added to the U.S. Constitution later. And we'll read about that the next chapter. So this was just the beginning. They took the ideas that they had at the state level, and they said, well, we did this and we did this, and they all came together and made that one constitution. Okay, the last thing that goes on this section, and this is number 4. I was giving you time to write that. And remember, don't go all the way to the edge. Come over here. In addition to the legislative branch, there was a governor. He was very weak, remember, and there was a court system. Let's put and a. So you could get a fair trial. They couldn't just throw you in jail and say, you're going to just go in there and rot because we tell you to. There was a governor and there was a court system. Okay? So that was the very beginnings of the United States. We started out still independent as 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, all 13. And then eventually you'll see that we all try to come together. And that's on Wednesday. So that's where we'll pick up then. If you need to pause, remember, do that. But this is where I'm going to end the video. and I'll see you tomorrow.